On Point is brought to you by Dargin Global.
A very good evening and welcome to another episode of On Point. I'm your host, Patria K.
And I'm Dennis Chung.
And we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, you know what's on my mind though for the week? What is happening in the world in terms of stability, with the US just so suddenly pulling back from out of Syria and the support they were giving to the Kurds, I think it was there. It's just creating all sorts of instability. And that for me is maybe one of the most critical things this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's a very interesting time to be alive in terms of the dynamics of geopolitics and world politics and what's happening.
We might get to see a world war.
No, heaven forbid, Dennis. Where do we fall in that in terms of Jamaica? I mean, one small island nation state, everybody knows our name, 3 million little people. How do we make use of what opportunities may present themselves?
I don't think that there's much we can. I mean, we're a small country. I mean, what are we going to do? They say when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. Mm-hmm. We're like the grass. We're a small country. Climate change, for example, is going to affect us small island states more than anywhere else. I mean, in terms of our tourism, our land mass might be affected, The world is really at the mercy of these large countries now.
Absolutely. Another thing that happened this week, certainly to keep your eye on, I'm still watching this Akampong story. I have a vested interest in what's happening. I physically went up there myself. And
we didn't talk about the Royal Reed and Fitzpatrick.
We must talk about that as well. There are developments happening in that space. Charges have been laid against 5 people. And an interesting discussion as to whether or not the case will be tried by, whether the Crown will be represented by the DPP's office or a fiat will be given and external attorneys will be representing the Crown.
What I like though, I like the Prime Minister's stance in terms of, hey, we are not going to talk about it as a government.
As he
We're
shouldn't.
going to allow the police and the various bodies to do their work.
Yes.
And I think that should be the approach.
Political play by the opposition, expecting, and one of the calls from Peter Phillips was a blow-by-blow from the Prime Minister as development
and
proceeding, and I don't think that's his place.
It's not appropriate.
It's not
He
his place.
should not be involved in it.
Yeah. Well, in the world of business, a couple of things happening as well. Some interesting IPOs that we hear might be coming up. Quite a few of those are public entities that divestments are making, that divestments are going to be happening. We hear about JPS on the horizon. Yeah. We hear about the highway 2000 on the horizon. Divestments going to be happening by the government, and average people are going to be able to buy into some of these. Yeah. Are all of them good buys, though? That's a discussion to be had.
I don't think one or two of them are, but maybe they have a plan to create some value.
There's some financial education certainly that people will need to do. Yeah? Well, coming up next, folks, we've got a lot in the show. We're starting out by taking a look at the tourism development product. It's the Heritage Week, and we're looking at how are we going to do heritage tourism right in Jamaica. And then also after that, we're going to be looking at the Spectrum Management Authority and how they are preparing Jamaica to make use of technologies.
But first, let's take a look back at some of the top business stories of the week.
At number 5, US President Donald Trump has imposed sanctions on Turkey over that country's military operation in northeast Syria. In his sanctions announcement, President Trump said he was halting negotiations on a $100 billion trade deal with Turkey and raising steel tariffs back up to 50%. The president also imposed sanctions on 3 senior Turkish officials and Turkey's defense and energy ministries. At number 4, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has downgraded its outlook for the world economy, predicting that growth this year will be the weakest since the 2008 financial crisis, primarily because of widening global conflicts. The IMF's latest World Economic Outlook, released Tuesday, foresees a slight rebound in 2020 but warns of threats ranging from heightened political tensions in the Middle East to the threat that the United States and China will fail to prevent their trade war from escalating. The new forecast predicts global growth of 3% this year, down 0.2 percentage points from its previous forecast. At number 3, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro ordered a 275% increase in the monthly minimum wage on Monday, the third hike this year as hyperinflation drains the value of workers' salaries. The minimum wage rose to 150,000 bolivars, that's about $8 US, from 40,000 bolivars. Additionally, workers will receive a food bonus of 150,000 bolivars. Despite the increase, the new monthly minimum wage barely amounts to enough to buy 4 kilos of meat. According to figures produced by the opposition-led National Assembly, annual inflation in Venezuela is currently running at over 50,000%. The government does not provide data on price rises. At number 2, Jamaica's unemployment rate continues to decline. It's now at 7.8%. The latest figures from the Statistical Institute of Jamaica Statin showed that some 1,254,100 individuals were employed in the labor force as at July 2019. A larger number of females were employed, mainly in the occupation groups clerks and professionals, senior officials and technicians, and in the industry group hotels and restaurant services. The July 2019 unemployment rate of 7.8% is 0.6 percentage points lower than July 2018. The unemployment rate for youth aged 14 to 24 years was 20.2%, a decrease of 2 percentage points when compared to the rate of 22.2% in July 2018. Statin says the decline in the overall unemployment rate reflected a higher growth in employment than the overall growth in the labor force. And at number 1 this week, for the first time in 7 years, consumer confidence in the Jamaican economy is down. Consumers' optimism recorded a slight decline of 3.5 points with an index of 179.9 points for the third quarter. The dip is associated with consumers' current realistic perception of business conditions and their expectations for jobs in the future. Business confidence also dropped significantly, going down 9.5 points, recording an index of 141.2 points. Despite this decline, however, businesses remain positive that their financial position will improve.
When we come back from the break, we're talking Jamaica and heritage tourism. Welcome back to On Point. Now, all week, Jamaicans have been celebrating our rich cultural heritage. And with Monday being Heroes Day, we decided On Point to take a look at a different kind of revenue potential for Jamaica: heritage tourism.
Talks of Jamaica cashing in on heritage tourism has been happening for years. The most recent talked about stalled plan has been the one to develop Port Royal and make the sunken city a massive tourist attraction. Business interests have also expressed frustration at the government's slow pace to make this a reality and to monetize other potential tourism heritage sites. Howard Mitchell, who was president of the private sector organization of Jamaica PSOJ, at the time urged the government to vigorously pursue heritage destination status for Kingston. The government is aware of the value of heritage tourism. In 2017, Minister of Tourism Edmund Bartlett noted that the growth in heritage tourism offers tremendous opportunity for Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. In an interview with JIS News, he said recent international tourism trends have pointed to a shift from the traditional sun, sea and sand phenomenon towards a more interactive experimental form of tourism.
Joining us now is the Executive Director of the Tourism Product Development Company, Dr. Andrew Spencer. Andrew, welcome.
Hey, Dr. Spencer.
Thank you for having me.
About the first question, what is the visitor who comes to Jamaica for heritage tourism? What are they looking for?
Oh boy, that's so broad, and I'm excited because you're doing heritage tourism, because I've often said that our competitive advantage lies in our heritage. It's one of those things that's almost impossible to imitate in another space. You can take pieces of what resemble our culture, but the actual authentic heritage of Jamaica is what we have to unearth. So the average visitor who comes to look for that, the millennial at this point, and we're looking at the future, these are the same people who stay in Airbnb, who stay in Trench Town, who go down to Seaford Town in Westmoreland. These are the kinds of people who want to, we refer to them in tourism theory as the explorer. Doesn't want to be caged in the enclave type of tourism, but wants to go out and live the life that the resident lives. That's a typical
value in that tourist, because they're not staying in the all-inclusive and they're not staying at these high-priced boutique hotels. They are a lot of times perhaps on a budget. Is there still commercial value in that type of tourist?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you why this type of tourist is important, because they're the ones who want to spend in the community. It's why they don't choose expensive accommodation facilities. They'll stay in a bed in your home because they want to be able to go out and spend with the community. We've actually found that the spending for what we call the allocentric traveler is much higher than the psychocentric.
Really?
People think that the people who stay in the fancy all-inclusives are the big spenders, and some of them are. But really what you have are those individuals who want the pre-packaged tours. They spend a lot of time and effort getting credit cards so that they can pre-book, pay for everything, and come here and spend not a single dime.
But let me ask you though, Dr. Spencer. Heritage tourism has always been touted. I know Dana McCauley,
yes,
for example, has been talking about it for a long time. And we do have a lot to offer. Our food,
McIntyre
culture.
Pike, sorry, my brain
McIntyre Pike.
Right, yes. So one is environment,
yes, yes.
Yes.
But that's where I wanted to go
Yes.
now. I mean, are we damaging ourselves in terms of how we have been treating our environment? Because the beaches are not as pristine as they were before. There's the way people dispose of their garbage, the damage that we cause to the drains and all of those things. It's a huge problem, isn't it?
It is a challenge. But I'll tell you how I view mass tourism, which is where I think you're going versus this more sensitive type.
Yeah.
Per capita, you're likely to have a greater footprint on the environment, which is where I hear you going. But we feel that there's a critical mass that you need from mass tourism, and because of all that Jamaica has to offer, you can then diversify into many of these other areas that we've been trying to. And we're very committed to that, which is why Jamaica is one of the few countries in the world, and probably only one of two in the Caribbean, that has a dedicated product development company focusing on these issues, identifying the need to have more of this type of tourism. For example, we talk about over-tourism. We're not there yet in many of our spaces, but our approach to that is to divert a lot of these tourists outside of these concentrated areas into more of the unknown spaces. We have a partnership with Loop now, which is taking people to some of these unknown heritage sites and exposing them, teasing them out, getting people to understand that there's quality in some of these spaces that we just simply don't know about.
Part of why heritage tourism will be successful, or one of the ingredients,
Yes.
Jamaicans have to know about the places for it to actually work.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of Jamaicans who don't know Jamaica.
Yes, yes.
How do we bridge that gap?
You know, there have been many campaigns. We've tried to embark on a staycation campaign, which is encouraging people to visit these spaces. But most of our efforts to getting Jamaicans into the tourism space have largely been to give lower room rates so that they can stay in hotels. I made a point today at another function that the only way you get your destination right is if you focus on the right pull factor. I don't go to Paris for a hotel. I go to Paris for the Eiffel Tower.
Absolutely.
I don't go to Rome. Yes.
But you know, Andrew, I tend to try and do a lot of staycations, right?
Yes.
And visit the various spaces and things. But some of these spaces you go to, some of the falls and that sort of thing, we don't have any proper control. So it's overrun by local people who really does a disservice to the offering, you know, with the harassment, the infrastructure sometimes around the attraction is not up to scratch.
No, we understand that, and so it's sometimes a quality issue. But here's where we come in as TPDCO. We work with the community. One, you mentioned harassment. We have multiple anti-harassment initiatives that are now trying to break the back of that. You speak about quality issues. We have an entire department dedicated simply to going in and looking at what is acceptable for an international market. We're looking at, again, dispersion. How do we move people out of some spaces into another space? How do we manage effectively? We have EIAs at our disposal of environmental impact assessments, social impact assessments. We have the data. I think we're in the best possible position that we've ever been. to be able to treat with some of these issues. So I hear you, but I want to make the point that Jamaica has over 100 internationally recognized attractions. I was told by someone today that it's in excess of 150. Most of us know single digits, right? I mean, if I ask people, and some people tell me they've been to 8, 9, maybe 10 of these, and I put it to you that there's a lot of quality out there. We have some upgrading to do, you know, but certainly the quality cannot just rest in those 10.
And I come back to the differentiator because all our Caribbean neighbors have sun, sea, and sand. All our Caribbean neighbors have a shared history.
Yes.
Where if we're talking true heritage tourism, their stories are going to be similar to ours. So in that 100, 150 attractions, what is going to make the Jamaica difference? That's going to have somebody in spite of the crime, in spite of the fact that Jamaica is more expensive than a lot of the other destinations, what is going to make them choose us over one of our other Caribbean neighbors that's cheaper and safer?
I'll tell you why. We already have a super advantage just with brand Jamaica. And you made the point about crime. We've had some challenges, and every time, it's an interesting relationship that you wouldn't expect. Your crime figures sometimes go up, arrival figures go up even more exponentially. And so I'm making the point that there's inherent in the notion of Jamaica already a positive image that is fighting hard against any other negativity that would come. If we carefully plan, if we are very deliberate in our intentions to get individuals to a particular level. You know, when we go in and do training with some of these individuals, we realize that some basic skills that are required to get them up to the level. So we have a product development department that does that. Then they pass them on to product quality, which is supposed to help them to get licensed. Once we are able to put that stamp of authority, we can vouch for the quality of that space. We've had some good ones over the last few years. We have the Rastafari Indigenous Village. We're proud of that. We're very proud of what we've been able to do at Bunkers Hill. There are other things that we're intending to do that are unknown. For example, some of the things we don't like to talk about, some of the darker parts of our heritage, our history. You have the Zong experience, the Zong massacre in Black River. We're about to create a monument and an entire story around it. You know what's lacking for most of our spaces? The story is not told accurately. The narrative.
And that is something that I'm curious about, because oral traditions we're going to rely on heavily to ensure that we keep to the integrity of the story. That when a tourist comes and we tell them X, Y, and Z happens, we are factually correct with the X, Y, and Z that we tell of the history, the heritage. And so from where you sit at TPDCO, how do you ensure that we are not telling the people foolishness? That the community members who are a part of this storytelling are being factual?
It's a very delicate balance, because we also have the issue of ensuring that they tell their story authentically and that we don't sterilize it to the point where it loses all of its real essence. But we have a team now, and I'm proud to say that in the last year, we've got approval to hire heritage officers. And we're going for people who are trained in the area. I have one person on staff who I call the archaeologist. So I have 3 heritage officers right now, planning to build that team even more, who are now going in, looking at the stories. We're the ones creating storyboards. And these storyboards that we put in these spaces, sometimes somebody doesn't even have to tell the story, but we are teaching people what the inaccuracies are, correcting those. And if you're not so sure, look at the storyboard, point to it, take somebody to that storyboard. Recently, someone took me to a storyboard we had put up and said, look, this is what we need. We're in the era of millennials who are just taking pictures. They want to go and say, I've been there. And the sign in front of Milk River Bath, for example, is not enough. They want to have the wording that's there, and they'll take a picture of that. They'll go back and they say, I was here.
Yes.
Or they just send it.
But you know, I still come back, and I mean, I think Jamaica has some beautiful places, and I've gone to quite a few of them, right? I like to every now and again head out. But I still think that we have not been able to capitalize on it. So, I mean, it's one thing to say that you go somewhere and it's in a natural state, but in natural state sometimes it's not that attractive. Right. You need to build around it. I mean, I go to a lot of attractions overseas, and they develop the thing around it so that it's inviting, you know, so that the people who are there are properly authorized. You understand what I'm saying, Patrice? Yeah, that's what we need to capitalize. I mean, we have the #1 tourist destination in the Caribbean, right? Which is Dunn's River. And that's lovely. But why aren't we developing the other places
I think
like that?
part of where Dennis is going is that there are some attractions that miss the wow factor.
Yeah, exactly.
You get a tourist that's coming here,
Yeah.
especially when you talk about the millennials, and they're not okay with walking through and a boring, monotonous recount of a horrid history of slavery and beating of black people. They are looking to be entertained.
Yes.
How do we create the entertainment wow factor?
Important. So you see the wow factor now varies based on your type of tourist, and we're very keen on knowing who is coming to us and who we're attracting. So you're right, there are those who want that dark history, I've discovered, and there are those who don't want that. And so the idea is the tour, the narrative must appeal to the type of individual you're attracting to a certain space. Now, as you pull them, you have to be clear on what it is you're going to direct them to. And it's the point I was making earlier, Dennis, as we continue to upgrade. Well, you hinted at something, you say, you know, why are we not doing? I'll say we are doing. The progress is a little slow, but we're in there trying to get them up to the standard. Because I know the wow you're talking about. But here's what I was saying about the model earlier. If you don't allow your attractions to be the pull, they will not attract the resources to become the pull. Yes. What am I saying? If you are coming to a destination for its accommodations, for a big brand accommodation, and then you're directed to a few attractions on its periphery, there's something fundamentally wrong with that.
Yes.
When you go to Arizona, you're going for the Grand Canyon.
Yes.
It's just a reality, you know, and so therefore you're going to pump resources into the Grand Canyon. I'm saying the same thing. You highlighted Duns River, which is our poster child. Some other poster children have come up over the years too. You have other ones that have the wow factor, but we are trying to identify the winners in the location. So we're taking a cluster approach. We just got funding in partnership with JSIF to look at something called the READY program, which is to help to pull these things, these attractions up to the level that any international visitor can go into them and feel that someone has put some thought into this.
There's some grassroots fundamentals, and I see the work happening, but I don't see it happening enough. I was able to go to Akang Pong 100% with the directions of TPDCO sign.
Yes.
You spend Loomis there?
That's a whole other conversation. But a lot of our attractions are difficult to find. We're not big on signage, and we don't appreciate the fact that people don't come from here, not just non-Jamaicans, but even Jamaicans.
Very true.
We don't come from here. How do I find this place? And telling me that getting there is part of the adventure is not a story I buy. If I can't find it, I can't enjoy it.
Yes, no, I agree. And so we now have a big program. We have an all-island signage program. It's almost like you saw it coming. So you asked the question. We actually just committed in partnership with the Tourism Enhancement Fund, 25 million. And we're going to engage the NWA to execute a signage program to all of our attractions. Now, it brings us back to Dennis's point. If you start pointing people in the direction of these things, you better ensure that the quality is of a certain standard. So we're making sure that we get some of these things right. We're identifying the key locations that we want to showcase. And as we chart the path to getting these things ready, we're going to also ensure that when you're physically trying to go to them, you can get to them.
I'm staying on that cart before the horse. One in particular that I've been angst about is this whole Port Royal business. Pirates of the Caribbean was a gold mine for us that we should have capitalized on. We're building out this whole port facility. The ships are coming. To what?
Yes. So as the product development company, we have been brought to the table, and you asked the right question, because to have a fantastic port when the outside environs from the port.
Well, not just the port, the history of the place.
No, I know, but in order to tap into that history, let me use Falmouth as an example. In order to tap into the history of Falmouth, you have to go beyond the walls, right? So when you create a little space inside a port that looks good, and there are those who want to venture outside of that space, you have to ensure that there's when somebody comes out, that there's a walking path into a space that makes sense, and you're not stepping into sewage. These are things that the product development company, in partnership with the NSWMA, in partnership with NWA, partnership with NWC, in partnership, I put up a chart in the office of all the agencies that we interact with, and I ran out of space.
Because you're coming off of a ship, you're not mobile, you don't have a vehicle, you're new to the space, you're going to be walking.
Absolutely. And then you're going to need expert tour guides as well.
Yes, but I mean, I'm happy that Patria raised a point about Port Royal, because that for me has been a bugbear.
Yes.
I ride out to Port Royal all the while, right? And it's a place where a lot of people exercise between airport and Port Royal. But when I think about it, Port Royal in itself should be like a mini Disney World with all the history and everything.
I think you should be careful how you use that, because there was actually a
I know,
proposal to pass by Disney World.
I know,
That we passed on.
but it should be, right?
Yes, yes.
There's so much history out there. The food is good. You know, the
Wenches
history,
and
everything.
pirates
Oh
and
gosh,
buccaneers
man.
and treasure and
outside of that, Andrew, when you look at it, my concept is that the whole strip from the airport down to Port Royal should be developed with tourism-related things.
Yes.
Right down.
And that is the discussion we're having. I mean, we're having a discussion a little late, but we're having that discussion. The KSAMC is on board with us. We're having the discussions as well with all of the partners to make sure that we have almost another elegant corridor of sorts leading into, if you want to call it a hip strip. In fact,
Yeah, man.
we're thinking
it
of
should be a hip strip. That should be the entertainment
the
place,
entertainment zone.
so that people in Kingston can sleep at
Yes,
night
yes.
because they don't have the
the
dances
excitement
going
that we have here about Jamaica and heritage tourism, I
yes.
sincerely hope carries through, because there is an opportunity. And what I love about it
Yes.
is the opportunity is not for the big man who own the big hotel.
No,
It is
no.
for the people who live in the
Yes.
communities to tell their
Inclusive growth.
stories.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Inclusive growth.
Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much for
man.
having me.
Thanks.
More
Andrew.
point, folks, after the break. Welcome back to On Point. Now, according to Minister of Technology Favour Williams, there are a whole slew of new technologies on the horizon. We're talking about developments in broadband. We're talking about 5G technology. Where does Jamaica sit in all of that? And what do we need to do as a country to prepare to take advantage of these new developments? That's what we're talking about on Point. My guests in the segment, we have the Managing Director of the Spectrum Management Authority, Dr. Maria Myers-Hamilton, and also a band engineer at Spectrum. We're going to find out what he does. We have Ty Shan Tracy. Folks, thanks for joining us. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Let me start with you, Dr. Hamilton. Can you tell us, and for the viewers, what does Spectrum do?
So thank you, Dennis, and for having us here today. We are actually the agency that manages the monitoring of spectrum in Jamaica. We issue license, we regulate
So
the space.
what do you call Spectrum for the viewers?
Well, there is a technical term, and I'm going to defer to Taishan to give you that technical term, but if you think about it, think about radio frequency. We manage that radio frequency space, anything wireless.
Okay.
So and you have licensed and you have unlicensed spaces, of course. We focus on the licensed spaces where devices like certain walkie-talkies would work, certain radios that the ships would operate on, the airplanes that come in, how they communicate with the tower, down to the simple wireless device that you access your car. So all these, anything that uses wireless, just think of Spectrum.
If there was any agency that needed to forward plan, Spectrum certainly would have to be one.
Absolutely.
Because as life changes, as we start getting into this Internet of Things and we start getting into these connected homes and lifestyles, everything seemingly now requires some kind of wireless connectivity that you must manage.
That's true.
How? How do you plan for what doesn't even yet exist?
The outlook, we would say we base our plans on the International Telecommunication Union. They have recommendations. So every 4 years, we attend a meeting called the World Radio Communications Conference, WRC, which basically lays out the regulations for what services can be used in what frequency bands. And then we take that now according to our region. So as I say region, the world is split into about 3 regions. We, the Americas, are we in region 2. So we'd be following the guidelines and recommendations for region 2 based on the ITU's allocations.
Help me and my non-technical mind to get it.
All right. So
Is it a finite amount of spectrum that we have? So are we going to get to a place where it's done?
Run out.
And we've run out, and then I can't turn on anything in my house anymore, or if I buy my new car, I won't be able to do the keyless entry. Is it a finite spectrum?
all right. Yes, it is finite to answer that question.
Apocalypse is coming.
Yes.
What
Terminator.
what is how we allocate. So say
Correct.
for instance, the the FM spectrum, or FM band, which goes from 88 megahertz to about 108 megahertz.
And that one people are familiar with because your radio, your favorite radio station uses the FM band.
Yes. So if that space, that 20 megahertz space, is occupied with users of 200 kilohertz, so this is 0 point something megahertz.
Fraction.
Yes, fraction. So if you so you can have a finite number divided into that 20 megahertz, and you'll have a full band. Other people would want to get into that space, but according to the ITU regulations that I mentioned earlier, the space is just 20 megahertz. So for someone else to get into that space comfortably and not cause interference to the other users of the band, someone will more than likely have to be removed, or if technology comes along again and improves our modulation, we can shrink the space of the current occupants to allow for more.
And just to answer, segue, that's why digital switchover, which I've heard we've heard a lot of, is very important. So if we digitize the signal,
you get more.
Exactly.
Okay.
So yes, spectrum is finite, but if we digitize it, then we can operate in a more effective and efficient way.
Because you're dividing it up into more.
Exactly.
So it is the same space, but you just use it more efficiently with digital.
Perfectly put.
You see, I'm not so bad.
Not at all. We've got some new things. So I'll give you an example. If I'm in particular places and I try and open my car,
yes,
my key doesn't work. When I press the little remote button to open my car doors,
yes,
there are some places that it just doesn't work.
I know.
Would that have something to do with the spectrum?
Yes, it does. So again, a typical example which I like to use. This teacher, which I met, real case, she bought her car from somebody who brought it in for her. You know, she didn't go to a dealer. She parked it in an area in Portmore. When she was ready to start, it wouldn't start. So her keyless device that opens her car and starts her car is working on a frequency being used in the Portmore vicinity.
By somebody else?
Yes, and the wave itself, that transmitter, is more powerful. The power it's transmitting is higher, so it drowns out her car. So she had to tow her car out of the area completely. So imagine the safety issues with that. As a woman, a teacher possibly not getting enough money, having X amount of cash on her, and she didn't know that this problem exists.
This is a whole new way of looking at the world, because much of the technology that we use,
listen to my follow-up question on what you just asked now. So the bad service we get from cable and Flow and Digicel in terms of the network, does the spectrum have anything to do with that?
No.
You're one of the people in problems. No, but I do want to get back to...
But they have challenges, and they have challenges with theft. To be very true to them, their services and their quality of service is affected by theft on their lines. And as soon as they put up infrastructure, sometimes it's taken down. And this is not new only to Jamaica. All over the world, people suffer from theft or road work. If road work goes on and a person is not careful, fiber is cut and that entire line has to be replaced.
How do we keep up as a country? Because much of our technology consumption, things that we don't make ourselves, things that aren't always going to come from the United States because people can get them cheaper from the Far East, which, based on what you're saying, is a whole different region with a whole nother set of spectrum. So how do we as consumers
be informed?
Check.
Yeah, so you be informed. One of the things you can do is go on our website, and there's a search engine where you type in the number, you flip over the device, you type in either the serial number or the manufacturer brand model number, and check to see if it's one of the approved items that we have done a type approval on. Once that is done, you'll know it will work because it has been type approved prior to it coming here.
But then that check is after you've bought it, eh?
No, you can do it before.
You can do it before.
But remember, it's on our website. So before you buy it, you ask your person, whoever you're buying it from, to do that check for you to determine will it work, or if it comes, what pin settings need to change. Because sometimes it's just a pin setting.
So you make an alteration to the product for it to be able to work.
Exactly. The main thing is to be informed and use this information carefully guarded, that you don't run into a safety issue. In the middle of the night, you're going into a pharmacy, you come out and you can't start. And to get a tow truck to come and get your car now, or somebody, that's a safety issue.
What will 5G mean for Jamaica?
So 5G, right now, as Taishan mentioned, we're attending the RRC as a delegation coming up in 3 weeks' time, by the end of October.
Where is that?
It's going to be in Egypt.
Egypt.
And the entire world will be there. All 3 regions will be represented. The space for spectrum will be decided there for 5G. Because right now it's still in deliberation. What will be that space for 5G? So I want you to think about 5G as a roadway. So the first thing, you have to build that road before now that particular car can drive on that road, which is the layer of applications and technologies. So, sure.
As in, she said space that would be recognized for 5G. In terms of space, like how I mentioned, the FM broadcast being between 88 and 108. So this would basically say what or identify which band, I like to say the word band, will be allocated for mobile IMT, international mobile telecommunications, or 5G. So as we can speak to our country right now, we have up to 4G LTE technology, which has been or was identified as being in 700 megahertz, 17/2100 megahertz. That was decided 4 years prior in the previous WRC, World Radio Communications Conference.
So I hear you saying these things. What I'm wondering is whether or not we are missing out as a country.
No.
And I tell you why I asked the question.
Sure.
So when you explain to me about radio and the bandwidth of radio, I know that every household is making use of this. I can select my favorite radio station. I know what frequency it's on. Wonderful. If I stop the average person on the road and ask them what is 4G and how do they benefit from it, they probably can't tell me.
Right.
And we're about to now talk about 5G. And so I asked the question, are we missing out? Are businesses missing out? Are people at home missing out on opportunities that they could be maximizing on with these new technologies that you are doing the work, making sure we have available to us, but we don't know what they are, so we're not using them?
So our minister is very passionate about connecting the underserved and the unconnected, because it is a big thing where the unconnected, the statistics are very large. So you and I have internet access at our homes, but the average person does not have internet access. Why? Because possibly fiber has not been run to that space, because of the terrain, a number of reasons. So wireless technology, like satellite technology, although it's not 5G, and you must remember, cutting edge is not always necessary. Typically you go on like the 4G, fourth generation, which is a stable platform, tried and proven, and there are a number of different things that can be run, like telemedicine. We just had a recent forum in Montego Bay where we demonstrated using a satellite link telemedicine, where a doctor would sit in a rural community, take the vital signs of persons and feed it back to his colleague in Kingston. The doctor in Kingston is looking at the person to determine if this person needs to be air ambulanced into Kingston, or it's nothing, it's not a biggie. Antibiotics can be treated, based on the symptoms. So what am I saying? The truth is, the main task, what we need to do is to get that underserved and underconnected on. Because as I said before recently, information in the digital age is a birthright.
But let me ask you, is it possible to go to a new technology, and given the infrastructure and the appliances we have here, it actually makes it worse than it was before?
No, it depends on planning. So when you roll out any form of application, you have to be mindful of a number of variables. Sometimes the capital outlay is the only thing persons think about, but the other side of it is the whole operating costs, the continuity, the business continuity back end. So take something like telemedicine, or even distance learning, which is a big thing, reaching persons within their community and carrying education into the field rather than forcing a child or a person to drive to a location. You plan for the layout, but then it has to be maintained. So the hotspots, there has to be a cost associated with constant maintenance. The content, the digital content also has to be developed. So there are a number of facets, and when you're planning a digital strategy, all the components must be included.
You just raised an issue that I don't even know how you sort this, because much of the usage of the spectrum will be by people who are seeking free applications, free apps. You purchase your fancy refrigerator, that's going to tell you what's not in there and what you need to go shopping for. There's really no cost to that information coming to you. But you would have had to spend, I'm assuming, to be able to make the spectrum available for that conversation of things in my house. What's your revenue model like, since people are trying to get
not
free?
Us. That's not us.
Well, wait, I'll answer
But go
the
ahead.
non-revenue part. Maybe you can answer the revenue part.
Sure.
The aspect of connected items and connected, so you mentioned the fridge, you mentioned like the microwave connecting to each other, but that all has a space or a band for itself. So the unlicensed band, I think more directors spoke about, we pay attention to the licensed band, but there's also an unlicensed band. So Wi-Fi, Bluetooth.
So you don't manage that side?
So it's there. We tell you that our manufacturers out there build their devices to operate in that band. So everybody, lots of devices operate in that band. So it's kind of interference high. So it's usually a hopping technique within that band to find a good stable signal to operate. But we don't need to manage that band, because it's, like I said, pointing back to the ITU and the recommendations, they have allocated that space or band for unlicensed use, and manufacturers like that band. So most of their devices that they manufacture will be operating in that band.
Very complicated state.
Yeah.
So like your Bluetooth, your headpiece.
That connects with my phone.
Yes, that's
Your
not
Not
like,
you.
no.
Your Wi-Fi router. It's us, but it operates in an
Does it
unlicensed.
make
Correct.
it easier to eavesdrop on an unlicensed band than a licensed band?
I would say, I'm not sure, but in that case, in a licensed band, you can claim for interference.
Correct.
So say, for instance, you have a point-to-point dish network setup, for backhaul or whatever reason. If you experience any interference or suspecting any eavesdropping on that signal, then you can come to us, because you have already paid for that.
Correct.
And that's your licensed spectrum to use. So it's part of the network, and no one else apart from you should be on that frequency.
Dennis has gone into spy mode, and I'm not going down that road with him, folks. Thank you so much.
Make sure you get your
for
license
joining
band
us.
here.
Thank you so much for joining
You're
us. We
welcome.
had with us two folks who taught me so much today, Dr. Maria Maris Hamilton and also Ty Shay Tracy. We take a break. Go again? Tyshan Tracy. We take a break and come back with more On Point. Welcome back to On Point. Heritage tourism is big business across the globe. Just how big? Here are the numbers.
40% of international arrivals are considered to be cultural or heritage tourists. It's estimated that the direct global value of culture and heritage tourism is well over $1 billion. The Asia Pacific APEC region rakes in approximately $327 million of this amount, directly providing some 50 million jobs and another 75 million jobs indirectly across the region. The most popular heritage tourist site in the world is the Great Wall of China, which saw almost 10 million visitors in 2018.
And our On Point team hit the streets and asked, how can we use the richness of our heritage sites to attract more visitors to Jamaica?
I believe that proper maintenance is very important, and taking care of this garbage issue that we have a problem with, making sure that the attractions are always clean.
Remodel that to them, like change color, paint, maybe new design.
Basically, the government can create more events for persons in like local people to go to at these sites to get to learn more about their culture. Because most persons aren't really educated about how things went down back in the day, So having the knowledge about your history would actually, make people want to know more about you, because you know your history.
It has to come in a package, a whole package with food places to relax and so on. And people who can tell the story of what the historical site is about.
Could make them more attractive by beautification, planting up flowers and stuff, maintain them properly, do more advertising.
I would say we could create some form of package deals around the specific heritage site. So it's not just about going to the heritage site, it would be like an event. So you would go to the heritage site, you might have dinner while there or do a fun activity while there or get some form of entertainment while there to make it more of an experience instead of just visiting somewhere.
It's not only about what the leadership of the country or the persons who are so charged to do the thing. It's about the nation as a whole wanting to enhance themselves and to better themselves. In other words, there has to be a national mindset. It has to be about patriotism, and the desire to see your country move in the right direction. I'm not so sure that nationally that sentiment is commonly held.
So much to unpack out of that show. I particularly love that discussion with TPDCO.
And when you brought up the point about Port Royal, it just shows how much we have not been able to capitalize on what I think is the biggest value added that we have a competitive edge, which is our heritage, our culture. I mean, Port Royal in any other country would have been a worldwide attraction.
Number one.
We just leave it there to rot.
I mean, I still have questions. And if we're going to talk about heritage tourism, the stories are one thing, but also the artifacts that back up the story are another thing. Where are the chests of gold and what's left of the sunken city? How much of that can we put our hands on as a country? How much of that have we been able to dig and save? And is it sitting in somebody's special living room somewhere?
I don't know.
The artifact side of things is equally as important if we're going to roll out the heritage tourism.
And you're right. I mean, we don't know where all of that is. We're not a country that treasures our history, We don't preserve things, And we can see it in our infrastructure. Once we build something, we just leave it till it runs down, and then we build something else.
I know. I mean, you talk about your travels, and I've gone to quite a few countries as well, and they've hyped up these destinations, and I go there with this huge expectation because I go there with my Jamaica. Which is high, as a Jamaican. There's a high level of expectation and entertainment value that you expect. And I go to some of these places, and I'm like, that's it.
Yeah, but they attract a lot of visitors worldwide.
Absolutely. It would crush me if anybody came to one of those places that we touted as being a great Jamaican attraction, and the takeaway was that's it. I certainly feel like Port Royal right now is a letdown in the condition that it's in.
Huge letdown. I mean,
it's a missed opportunity.
I think that we could have earned billions of US dollars from Port Royal. I mean, the people who are living there, who are basically living in close to poverty, should not be. Because it just has so much value potential.
Absolutely. And then the other discussion with Spectrum was another interesting one. I certainly learned a lot because it wasn't a space that I knew much about and how allocation was done and how we plan for the future. What is interesting is a lot of technology is being injected into our future. And how much are we as a government planning for that technology?
I don't, it's true. I mean, technology really, you can't do without it today. I mean, if your internet is down at your house for 10 minutes, you know, it's like having babies.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't have a computer at work, you're unproductive basically. And when I look at all of that, and I look at how unstable our telecommunications and internet services in Jamaica, I don't think that the government and the OUR has done a proper job to ensure that we have that stability, because that's our productive base.
Absolutely. As the world gets smaller as well, there's going to be this real consideration, because the internet is making everything available to everybody, and we're chasing price. And so if the cheapest car is in Japan, we're going to buy the car in Japan, and then when it comes here and it doesn't work, what's the repercussion for consumers? It is something that manufacturers are going to have to wrap their minds around, as well as the Consumer Affairs Commission right here in Jamaica. But that's where we're going to have to wrap the show today, folks. The very hardworking crew deserve all our thanks. Thank you for everything that you do. Thanks also to you, the viewers, for tuning in to another episode of On Point for one more week. I'm Patria K.
And I'm Dennis Chung.
See you next week.
On Point was brought to you by Dodge & Global.